Rightio, I believe we're live. Hi everyone, thanks for joining the stream. My name is Daniel White. Some of you know me as Dansky. I'm an instructor with Envato Tuts Plus, and this evening we're going to be jumping into Adobe XD. This is going to be really cool. We've got 15 time-saving shortcuts for Adobe XD. So if you've never used XD before and you're a complete beginner, welcome first of all. If you've used XD a little bit or you're an absolute pro, hopefully there's going to be something here for everyone to learn, whether you learn one thing or all 15. It's going to be really, really cool. So it's a nice little bit of variety as well. Hello to everyone in the chat. If you do have any questions as we go through the stream, please do feel free to ask them. And I will do my best to answer them at a few different points throughout the stream. So yeah, let's kick this off. So you can see on the screen, I've got a bunch of different artboards. These are a little bit of a tease as to what we're going to be doing. And if I just jump to the first one. We're first going to kick this off with floating shadows. Now, these can be especially useful if you're designing something on an app or a site in XD and you want to lift your image or an icon or whatever it is off the page a little bit, or make it seem like it's levitating. So let's just zoom into this artboard a little bit. And I'm just going to grab the ellipse tool, just left click and hold shift, and we're going to draw a circle. So we've got a red circle. What we're going to do now is grab that ellipse tool again, and we're going to draw an ellipse underneath something that's very narrow in height but matches the width of the shape here. Now this could be a graphic or an icon or whatever it is. In fact, let's just grab that rectangle tool and we'll put this inside a card of sorts. So we'll give this a color. Let's make this a bit more interesting. We'll get a bit more creative. And I've got some images here all ready to go for this very reason. So we can click on the artboard name and we can also change the background color. So I'll make this ever so slightly off white. We're going to go for a super light gray. And that means that I can then select the color of this card and this will stand out. And I'm just going to duplicate this image layer. We'll scale that up, holding Alt and Shift to scale from the center. And we'll just give this a border with a width of, let's go for 3. And we could even eyedrop something from the scene, so we could pick a similar color. And remember, scaling towards the center, you just drag from a corner and hold Alt and Shift. And then we can group this circle and the image together by holding Shift and left clicking on both of them and going to Object and Group. Okay, so that's a bit more interesting now. We'll just group our entire card together and center that in the middle of the artboard. So that's going to make this floating shadow look a little bit more interesting. So let's just disable that border. Now for this floating shadow, we're going to give this a fill of black. So that's all the way in the bottom left corner of the color picker. Don't worry about adjusting the opacity yet. We can do that in a little bit. Now there's a few different ways you can do this. We can select the tick box here and just change that drop down from background blur to object blur. And what this does is it allows you to grab this slider here and really quickly and easily just effectively blur the shape. So a really quick way to mock this up to see if this is an effect that you'd like to use is to do something like this. And there we go, we've got a floating shadow and we can drop the opacity as well if we like. But we can actually make this look a little bit better in XD. And if you've got the latest update, it also introduces radial gradients, which is awesome. So first of all, I'll do this with linear gradient. And what this allows you to do is add a fill to this shape that graduates from one color to another color. So you can see here in the color picker, we now have the gradient slider. And we can pick one end and pick any color we like. Of course, for this to be a shadow, we're going to be running along this very left axis here. just so we're not playing in the space with any color. Unless, of course, you do want to add color to your shadow, and then by all means, feel free to add some color. So what we're going to do is we've got black on the one on the left, and we can click the swatch on the right here, and we're going to add white. And if we click in the middle, we can then add black. In fact, this one on the left does need to be white as well. So to add a swatch, you just click anywhere on that gradient bar and just drag it off if you want to get rid of it. So it should go from white to black to white. Now, if we zoom in at the moment, our gradient is actually running vertically, which is no good. We need this to go from left to right horizontally. So we can just grab these anchor points here, and you can see in real time, it will adjust our gradient. And in fact, we can actually grab this middle point here, and you can see on the gradient bar in real time, we can actually adjust the central position of this color here. But I think for now, we'll probably go back to leaving that in the middle. So let's just position that in the middle like so. Now what this does is, using a linear gradient, this actually darkens the center area, and we can actually select this and pick a slightly lighter color. We don't have to go for this kind of bottom left corner black, so we can make that ever so slightly lighter. So this color here, for example. But because it fades out to white, it just creates a much more realistic shadow. And of course, depending on how wide your object above is, or your graphic or your card, whatever it is, you can extend this from both sides by holding Alt and clicking on these outside anchor points. Because of course, if we have our shadow very small like this, it looks a little bit unrealistic with this being so wide. So we can extend that out, and we can bring this down so we can make it a bit narrower, and you can just fine tune your shadow and even the distance as well. So we could have this here and just go Object, Arrange, Send Backwards. So it sends it behind it. So rather than creating an effect where the shadow appears to make this card levitate, it actually looks more like it's just the card is bending off the page. So you can really use these shadows to just give a bit more depth to something as well. And we could even copy this up here. So you can go edit and duplicate to create copies nice and quickly. And you can see what I mean. You know, we've kind of added that same shadow up there as well. So you can get super creative. We can make that one a bit less, so it's a bit more subtle. Now the other way of doing this is with a radial gradient. So again, from the color picker, we can just go up to that linear gradient drop down and change that to radial. And I'll just put this back to how it was. So we'll remove that middle swatch, and we just have one that goes from black to white. Let's change that back to radial again. And that's the wrong way around. So just click on a swatch, select the color, and it will change it like so. So using the radial gradient, I find that it's a little bit more subtle. It's not so much kind of this darker area in the middle. So if you want something that is a bit more consistently subtle, you can even introduce more colors as we've done before. So if you wanted something really, really subtle, you could add another lighter color here. So it goes from white to a very light gray to then go to the black. Or you can go for something like the linear gradient, or you can just add tons of different swatches. So those are a few different ways that we can use shadows to both create depth and also make objects or graphics appear to levitate in Adobe XD. Or you can just go for the good old solid fill, and we'll just add an object blur here as well, drop that opacity. So you can see there's three different ways that we could create that effect. So it just depends what your object is and the kind of effect that you're looking for. Okay, number 2. So this is how to convert text to a path. So of course in XD we have a type tool. We can left click and we can start typing some text. Come on, Dan, let's be a bit more creative. Awesome. It's that moment you need to be creative. I'm going to type some text. What can I type? Text. Brilliant. No. Okay. Well, we can add some color. Come on, let's add some color. There we go. That's creative, isn't it? Okay, so we've typed some text, and at the moment this is editable text. There's so many things that we can do with it, or only so many things we can do with it. So we can still combine this using the Pathfinder tools, but if we wanted to add a gradient to this, we can't because it's text. So that's something that may come in a future update, I'm not sure, but if for any reason in XD you need your text to be no longer editable, similar to Illustrator when you go Object, Type, and Convert to Outlines, all you can do is go to Object, Path, and Convert to Path. And what this does is essentially turns your editable text in XD into a graphic. So it's very similar to the Create Outlines function in Illustrator. This is now just a shape. You can't edit this text anymore, but you can do a few other things, like you can apply a gradient to this text. So at the moment, if you do have any text in XD and you're thinking, I just really want to add a gradient to this, but I can't add it to the text. If you're happy to kind of check that your fonts are all good and everything's great, just go ahead, Object, Path, Convert to Path, and it will turn that text into a path, and then you can apply gradient effects. And you could always just keep an editable version of your text just somewhere else outside the artboard, just in case you need to double click or like change the font or make any other changes in future. You've got that editable version there. You can reference the font, you know, so you have that flexibility. That's what I like to do, just as a backup if I'm not sure about something, just because it means I've got something to fall back on. So there we go. Let's go and give this a really nice gradient. So you can see we can get a bit more creative, and you can do this with icons as well if you have a logo or something. And there we go. Oh, look at that awesome text. There we go. We're getting creative now. So here's the editable one. We've got that. This is the one that is converted to a path. Okay, number 3. So we're going to look at combining and creating shapes. Now, the XD UI is very streamlined. In fact, when you first open it up, you may be thinking, where are all the tools? Because Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, all of these programs have been developed for years. They've got a huge selection of tools in the toolbar. And XD is very streamlined in that regard. However, using these basic tools, they give us everything we need to go and create more advanced shapes or icons or even logos. So let me demonstrate. So let's just grab the ellipse tool, left click and hold shift to draw a circle. And for now, I'm just going to give this a black fill, just easier to work with. And we can then select the rectangle tool and just left click and draw a rectangle. And again, give this a black fill as well. And you can see XD has these smart guides that mark where the center of things are, which is really helpful for lining stuff up. But if you're not sure and it looks off center like this one, you can just drag over everything you'd like to align. And then from these alignment options at the top, just click this one here, align center horizontally, and it will snap that in place. Now, we're actually going to create a cog or a settings icon. We don't want this to be completely rectangular. So if we double click on this shape, we can now select individual anchor points, and we can then use the arrow keys on the keyboard or the mouse to just move these around. So for example, I could use the right arrow key on my keyboard and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, we'll go with 5. And then just click on the opposite side and use the left arrow key and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just so I know they're equal. It's a bit easier than using a mouse. And if you want to move with a bigger increment, just hold shift before you press your arrow keys and it will make a larger jump. Now this is sticking out a little bit to me, so I'm going to bring this down. In fact, I'm going to double click again and do the same for the bottom. So use that left arrow key, 1, 2, 3, select the right anchor point, and then use the right arrow key, 1, 2, 3. So because I'm going to be repeating this round for the settings cog icon, I just want to make sure this first one is correct. And I can move this up and down, it doesn't really matter. And we could even skew this a little bit like so. Maybe scale it up. And then just select this circle, go to Object, and nope, go to Edit, Duplicate, and we'll give this a fill color that matches the background, so in this case white, and we'll scale down from one of the corners, holding Alt and Shift. Now this is where we can determine the width of our cog icon. So this space in the middle, is it going to be really small or is it going to be quite large? I think we'll go for something in between like this. And then what we can do, in fact what we can do is we can select the white circle, hold Shift and select the black circle. And then from the Pathfinder options at the top here, we've got a few different options. So we can add these together or we can subtract them. Now I want to subtract them because what this will do is it will take these two shapes and it will subtract whichever shape is on top. So in this case the white circle, it will subtract it from the other shape selected, the black circle. So if I just lay a color behind just so you can see what I'm about to do. At the moment this is a white circle. We want it to be transparent. This is going to be the center of our cog settings icon. So again, we'll just select them both and use that subtract option. That's the second one in, and it will knock out that middle piece. And you can see here it's highlighted in blue now as well, so we know that we've applied a subtract effect to that, and we can actually click it and it will return our shape to us. We may need to color it up again, but it separates those back, which is quite nice because in Illustrator it's a very permanent thing using those Pathfinder tools. In XD, it's not permanent. You can reverse it if you need to. So that's super cool, but this is now one shape. This is treated as one shape in Illustrator. And I can select this little guy at the top here, go to Edit, Duplicate, and just rotate from one of the corners. Now I'm going to rotate and hold Shift, just so it snaps to those increments. And then drag this down. Now what I want to do is, I don't know, let's just make this really, really unbalanced. You can do this by eye, but for me, I'm all about the precision. So what I like to do is group these 2 points together and then select the circle as well and just align these to the middle vertically. So you'll see it snaps those in place. So the amount of these parts of the cog here sticking out is equal both on the top and on the bottom. Now the reason that we want those to be right like that is because, well, one, it's just really, really good to have that level of attention to detail, but also we're going to be duplicating this and rotating it and using it multiple times. So if the first one's wrong, then the rest are all going to be off and you might end up with a cog that just looks a little bit skewed off. So we're going to go Edit, Duplicate, because we've done this all perfectly with the alignment tools now. And we're going to rotate from the corner, again holding Shift. And then we can hold Shift and select all 4 of these now. Again, we're going to duplicate that, hold Shift, and this will snap to a 45-degree increment as well. And we can even scale down these ones if we want. So while we have those selected, we could leave them exactly the same, or we could just scale them down ever so slightly. Depends entirely what kind of cog icon you're going for. And you can do this with a whole bunch of different icons, but as you can see, we've created this cog icon, settings icon, whatever you want to call it, just using these 2 tools, the square or the rectangle and the ellipse, and then a few Pathfinder tools and alignment tools. You know, it's pretty, but in terms of the toolbar, it's literally just these 2 tools. And when you look at a lot of UI design, or if you're wireframing or prototyping or whatever it is you're doing, you can actually create an amazing amount of things just with these basic shapes. And what we can do now is, well, we don't need this red background anymore. We know that the center of the cog, the settings icon, is transparent. We can just drag over everything. We can just check it's aligned. If it's not aligned, just to double check. So we'll just align it there, both horizontally and vertically. And we can select this one here. Now this is add. What this will do is it will take all of these individual shapes, all of these kind of cog pieces around the edge, the circles, and it will combine them into one shape. But of course, it's selected now, so we can undo that if we need to go back. But I don't think we do. And then we go, we've got a cog icon. Now we can scale this and it doesn't skew out of shape or anything. And there we go, we've created a cog icon, a more advanced complex icon, just out of some basic shapes. And we can center that in the artboard as well, just because if I don't, it's really going to annoy me. It's all about the detail, remember. Okay, number 4. So we've got half pixels. Now, when you work in XD, you're working on a really complicated app or a site design, or you're just drawing icons, whatever you're doing in XD, at some point, you're going to come across half pixels. Now, XD doesn't really render them in the same way Photoshop does, so your designs in XD will look super smooth and lovely and it'll be amazing, but you might find every now and then that you get something like this. In fact, let's just remove the border, give this a fill. We'll go for green, and you'll look at it and it will be like that, and you go, hang on a second, 84.78 pixels, and this is the width and the height of the shape as well. And you may often see this in the X and the Y as well. So rather than having a rounded up pixel, you will have a decimal place of some sort. Now, this isn't the end of the world. There's no need to panic. But if you do have something like this and you're exporting to a raster format, so let's say a PNG, which isn't a vector-based format, then these half pixels, or these not complete pixels that aren't rounded up properly with a decimal place, they will appear blurry and they won't appear as crisp and as sharp as they could do. So one thing that you can do is you can just select these and just round them up. So round them to the nearest decimal place, or the nearest number I should say. Something like this. Now usually when you work in XD, if you're creating shapes, usually it will snap to the grid, so it's not an issue. But as you start creating more and more complex shapes, like the icon we just demoed, invariably you're going to click on an object and notice that it has a decimal place for the width, the height, or the X and the Y position on the artboard. And it's just something to be aware of. You know, if you're exporting to something like an SVG format, which stands for Scalable Vector Graphic, when you're incorporating SVGs into your digital project and you're exporting for developers, you know, it's going to look super, super clean because it's just a preferable format over something like a PNG. But if you are going to have PNG there as a fallback, then or for whatever reason you might just want to export PNG, this is just something to be aware of, because your icons, if they have those decimal places, they will look not as crisp and as they could do, and they'll be a bit blurry. So just something to be aware of. However, on the flip side of it, if you're looking to create something in XD like an arrow, for example, so let's just grab our rectangle tool, and I think we'll stick with our little green theme we've got going on here. So we'll create an arrow and we'll duplicate, and we'll make this a bit narrower. So you can see we're all good at the moment. Edit, duplicate, and we'll just rotate this. We'll hold shift, so we're snapping to that 45-degree rotation you can see there. And I'll move this up and narrow this down. Cool. And then I'm going to edit and duplicate this again. And of course I'm going to drag this down. In fact, let's just adjust these a little bit like so. So my arrow does have a point. Okay, so at the moment, all good. Apart from the fact that the space here, top and bottom, isn't actually equal. It's not equal. And this bit here doesn't actually touch. So what we can do is we can, in this case, embrace the half pixels. So we'll first go up here and we'll just try and move these together. So XD does snap, which is incredibly useful most of the time, but not all of the time. And you'll see we've got a few of these up here now. Now the X is the X-axis, that's the horizontal plane. The Y value is the Y-axis, so that is the vertical plane. And what we can do is go in here and just start adjusting some of these decimal place digits. And you can see just by adjusting these, and then we can go another layer in, I can actually get these to line up to a point. Now this is especially useful if you are creating icons in XD. Of course, be mindful of half pixels and things, but if you really want your icons to be done in XD, because it does have all the tools to do that, this is a great way to get this to work. Now we're going to group this top and this bottom part together and go Object, Group, and we're going to correct the spacing here so this middle part is in between, it's balanced. So we can hold Shift and then just align these here. And then go to Object and group our entire arrow together. So there we go. We've got one way of getting around half pixels if you are going to be exporting to something like a PNG format or a JPEG or some kind of raster-based format. But if you're all about that precision and it has to look right on screen for your prototype or for your design or whatever it is, if it's going to go in your portfolio or something, then that is a way that you can go in and manually edit these X and these Y positions using a decimal place just to get everything to line up perfectly. Or something else you can do is you can design your icons in Illustrator and simply copy and paste them over. That's what I do because I've been using Illustrator for years, so for me it's just more comfortable, and Illustrator and XD for the most part they play nice together, so copying and pasting things from Illustrator into XD you know, works absolutely fine. Okay, rightio. So we're going to look now at adjusting an individual corner radius. And in fact, I can grab this arrow from the last one. And I'm just going to go Object and Ungroup. Now, what we can do is we can grab these inner anchor points here, these little circles, and we can use these to quickly and easily round off corners on shapes. However, what we can also do is we can hold down the Alt key on the keyboard and round off one corner specifically. So we can round off this one corner here. Let's go for, let's say, 6 pixels. And you can see here it adjusts that one corner. So we could round this one off here for 6 pixels as well. And at the moment these are still grouped together, so we're just going to ungroup those first. Select the top one, hold down Alt on the keyboard and drag this down like so. So again we can hold down Alt and drag, and I might just bring these two in just a little bit just so they round off nicely. And you can go in and manually type in a value here if you want as well. Now this is a slightly more creative version of an arrow, but if you do need to round off individual corners, rather than just using the kind of all corners must have the same radius option here, you can click this and you can edit you can input the different values here manually. But if you're not much of a person for just kind of going in and going enter a value, tab, 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 which one of these relates to which corner, which is something I constantly forget, then you can do it visually. Just holding that Alt key allows you to easily adjust that radius for individual corners. So there we go, that's a nice quick one. This next one is about layout grids, incredibly useful for layout design if you're doing mobile responsive design, desktop responsive design, or any of that stuff. And this is a feature that was added to Adobe XD in one of the recent updates. It's something that I was personally waiting for, and I'm excited that it's here. So you can click on your artboard, whether that's a desktop artboard or a phone mobile artboard. And we have the grid section on the right, and previously we had the square grid and you could change the grid size, which was fantastic and everything, but now we can change this to a layout grid. And this allows us to give our layout grid a color. And we can specify the number of columns for our grid, the gutter width, which is the space in between each column, or the actual column width itself. And at the very bottom, we can choose if we can set it so the space on the left and right edge of our layout grid is equal, or we can just change it completely so we have a top and a bottom margin introduced as well. So it depends what you're working on, but for most people, if you're doing responsive design on desktop or mobile or tablet, you'll want something like this with the left and the right equal. So we could have, let's go and add 8 columns in total, and we'll change the gutter width to 10. So remember, that's the space in between the columns. And this one in here, the column width, is now italicized. So this text is in italics because essentially if we're defining the number of columns, we're saying that the gutter width has to be this, and we have a margin of 7 either side. Once you have those 3 different values, your column width is going to be determined automatically. So if I go and let's change the gutter width, you'll see that it automatically changes the column width. And if I go and change the column width, you'll see that it automatically changes the gutter width. So it shows the one that XD is changing for you in italics. Now the reason it changes automatically is because if it didn't, it would just give you an impossible grid. Or we could add 12 columns like this, and it scales as well. So I'm holding Alt and just scaling this up, scaling it down, which is really, really useful. And we could go and increase the space here. And of course there, the column width has to come down. So you can see whichever one you change, it will adjust and show this in italics, just so your grid is actually physically possible. So that's layout grids, incredibly useful for responsive design, mobile design, whatever it is you're doing. Oh, and by the way, you can turn it on and off just by clicking the checkbox. So you can check your grid, drop its transparency if you want. If you want something really subtle that doesn't interfere with your ability to view your design, or you can just turn it off. So yeah, really, really cool addition. Love that one. Okay, I'm going to use this arrow again. This arrow is popular today. Well, first of all, we can just actually go and ungroup that a whole bunch and unite this together, kind of like we did before. So now this is one shape, and we're actually going to look at a nifty little trick where you can align whatever content you've got to the pixel grid. Now you might have designed an entire app screen here, whatever it is. In fact, let's go and create some shapes. We'll go and create a few shapes, and we're just going to kind of throw in there some decimal points. Remember what I talked about earlier. When you're creating things in XD, you invariably will get some decimal places, and it will become incredibly chaotic. And sometimes you create something and you think, oh, I wish it would all just snap to the pixel grid. Well, fantastic news. It can do. If you have an entire app screen you've done and you've got some bits aligned and some bits not, just drag over everything, go to Object, Align to Pixel Grid. And you click that and you see the circle there and a few other little bits will have shuffled in place, and everything. Let's see how it was. Yep, so we had those decimal points there, and then suddenly everything becomes aligned to the pixel grid. So when I'm working in XD, if I'm doing an icon set, for example, or I'm designing an app or a site, every now and then, probably due to some sort of paranoia that there'll be mistakes, I'll just drag over everything and go Object, Align to Pixel Grid, just to check that everything is aligned to the pixel grid, because it's just best practice, you know, just to have everything nicely organized, or at least in my opinion, to have everything nicely organized. So when you hit export on your icons, your assets, everything's going to look super crisp and super sharp. Okay, so that's a really quick one about how to quickly align to the pixel grid. Right, let's grab this circle and we'll get a little bit creative here. Now this next one is a huge time saver. So bringing it back to the title of the stream. And I'm just gonna throw a bit of transparency on there. And I'll group these together. Make sure everything's aligned first, and there we go. So we'll group that together and position that in the center. Now, when you're working on an app or a site design, or anything that gets remotely complex in XD, invariably you're going to group lots of different elements together. So it might be the header nav bar, or you might have a content feed with pieces of content, and you're going to start grouping objects together because it makes selecting those objects and moving them around considerably easier. But what if you want to go and make changes to something within that group, but you don't want to have to go through the hassle of going object, ungroup, and then ungroup again, and then you make the change, and then you've got to go and group it all back together again after you've selected it. It's frustrating, but don't worry, don't worry. There is a way around that. So you can see, these are just 3 circles that I have grouped together, and I can move them around as one object, but I can also hold down Command, or if you're on a Mac, or Control if you're on a PC, and click on any individual object. And what it does by holding down Command or Control is it takes me through that into that group, and I can go and make some tweaks. Go and resize it if I want to, and you can see the bounding box and everything adjusts in real time. And I'm still inside the group at the moment. And then all I've got to do to come out of the group is just click anywhere on the workspace, anywhere outside this group. And you can see there's this border, this kind of thing left over. If you get anything like that, just click again, click on the workspace. So if you double click and you go inside and you start editing shapes, the easiest way to come back a step and get out of the shape or out of the group is just to click on that workspace, and it will bring you outside. So that's a really quick way you can jump into a group, make changes, and then jump back out. Okay, right. So next we've got masking images. Now this is an incredibly useful one to know. So we are going to, we're going to get creative in the name of not just using squares and rectangles. There we go. So we'll merge those together into one shape, now a star. And we can go to, well, we can go to File and Import. And I've got some images in here, so we can pick a photo. Let's go for this one. And it will add the photo into our document. Of course, this photo is hugely, hugely high res. So I'm going to scale this down to the center, holding Alt and Shift. And I'm actually going to send this to the back as well. So I'm going to send this to the back, just so my shape that I'm going to be masking this image inside is on top. Haha. Yes, as well, just to touch back on that last one, you can hold Command or Control and click, or you can just double click and it will take you inside the group. So just double clicking can take you in the group as well. Depends whether you want to hold down a key or just double click. Entirely up to you. But thank you to Pixel and Bracket in the chat for that one. Okay. So we've got this shape here, this star shape. And what we can do is hold Shift and select the image as well and go to Object and Mask with Shape. So what it does is it will take this shape on top and then it will put the image behind into that shape. And there we go. Now we can move this around and we don't have any excess image. You know, in Photoshop when you mask you get like loads of kind of image around the edge and it makes it difficult to select sometimes. No, not in Adobe XD. Nice and clean, and we can easily just edit that crop by double clicking and it shows us the image again. We get a grey border here showing our shape, so we can see how any changes we make to the crop are being adjusted in real time. So we can adjust that crop. We could even go and rotate it, something like this, and I can see, of course, if I do something like that, it's going to leave this big white space down here. So it's really handy being able to see the outline of the shape. And again, just click out on the artboard when you're done and it will crop your shape or your image inside that shape. Cool. Right, let's do some questions. And please do feel free to leave any feedback on the stream as well. I hope you're all enjoying it. I'm loving it. I love using XD. It's a pleasure to use. It's clean, it's minimal, it's snappy and responsive. So doing these XD streams is always an absolute pleasure for me. Okay, Mr. Conway 007. Hello again, sir. I've seen you in many of the previous streams. It's good to have you here. Can you show how to set up a desktop, tablet and mobile responsive artboard using the new Cyan Blue layout grids? I can indeed. Okay, so let's just go and grab this. Now we've got lots of presets here. So we'll grab a Web 1920. Now it depends on the framework that the site's being built in. So it's always worth kind of just understanding that with either yourself if you're building it or your developer, because there are a ton of different responsive grids out there. You might have something like Bootstrap or something else, Golden Grid. There's loads of different types and they all have very different dimensions as well. And it's something that I think is constantly evolving because technology is evolving, and the way we design for technology is something that we've got to try and keep ahead of. So we've got this 1921 here, and we can turn on our layout grids, and we could set this to 12 columns, and we could increase the margin here. Let's go for 375, something like this. So this is just purely an example. We could then, well, we could just duplicate this artboard by dragging, holding Alt and Shift. And we could scale this in a little bit. Of course, you would have specific sizes depending on the devices that you were designing for. So we could go for a 480 for a mobile one. And of course, I can name these artboards. So we'll just call this desktop, mobile. And we can't see the layout grids because the dimensions, I think at the moment, are totally impossible. So let's just dial that down a little bit. And for mobile, we'll go something like 4 columns. And we'll drop that column width. So I'm just kind of improvising these at the moment, but it depends, as I say, what kind of grid you're going for. So this is the principle of how you can get layout grids to work. So if you jump online and look for specific grids, depending on what you're designing for, the device sizes, all that stuff, you'll be able to, in fact, I think you can even get grid calculators online as well that will have like a whole bunch of the most popular sizes for different types of frameworks. And it will tell you what, the number of columns, the gutter width, the column width, and then any space that you'd need either side so as well. So it's one of those things that once you kind of, if you work with a developer or a team regularly and that's how you design, then once you have that kind of understanding of, okay, this is the grid setup that I've got, you can just pin them up on the wall somewhere. You've got all those dimensions ready to go, or you could just create a template. So you could just do a large desktop, a slightly smaller desktop, tablet, mobile, really small mobile, and just have all of these different artboards set up in a template file with all of those dimensions. But that is how you go about creating the actual layout grid itself. I'll leave these two over here. We'll pop them over there somewhere. Okay, let's do a few more questions. Jahidul Islam says, I'm new about XD. What can I do with this? This type of design we can do in Illustrator. So why XD? So the main advantage to XD is Illustrator's got lots of tools. It's amazing. It's been around for many years. XD is tailored specifically towards wireframing, prototyping, and design. So you can wireframe in XD, and of course you can wireframe in Illustrator. There's a few different tools, one of which we will cover in a moment, called the Repeat Grid tool. But the biggest advantage is that we can switch into prototype mode and we can start linking screens together. We can choose transitions, we can set the easing, the duration, we can click on objects, we can link them back, so we can have buttons, we can have text, and we can really create some interaction. So essentially what this does is, if I'm thinking, oh yeah, I've got this really cool idea for an app, I don't know if it's any good or not, or I want to pitch something to a client and see what they think, before you get to all the design, the creative, fun stuff, the icing on the cake, if you will, you get to really create very quickly a bare bones prototype, get the screens linking together, test the product you've got with it, whether it's a client, a stakeholder, a customer, or even just yourself. You can get a real feel for how the product actually feels to navigate around it with a prototype. So, you know, and then you can make refinements to the prototype. And all of this is before we even get anywhere near design. So when you come to adding the design, you're really just kind of polishing off something that's that you know at the core is a really great concept, and it works and people find it easy to use. So, you know, that wireframing and prototyping, especially with the way kind of, you know, technology is constantly changing and the way we interact with it is changing, that user experience design with wireframing and prototyping is just becoming essential, because you know, people want to have great experiences, effortless, easy experiences with their tech, because tech is just becoming so you know, such a huge part of our society today. So, you know, making sure the core of all that tech is right with wireframes and prototypes is essential. You know, the design's important, but it's the fun stuff, the icing on the cake. So that's my really passionate, long-winded explanation about what XD is and how wireframing and prototype is really beneficial, and in my opinion, a key part of the process. Akash says a similar thing. Can't we do the same in Photoshop? What's the difference between XD and Photoshop? Again, very, very similar. XD is a very snappy, responsive program. You can have tons of high-res imagery and just quickly zoom in and out. In fact, I'm on an external screen, so you can't see how fluid it is, but when I'm using it on my laptop, it's just so smooth, so slick, responsive. Even when you've got tons of high-res imagery, it's just a really great program to use. And of course, you get the design, the prototyping features as well, and you can then share those prototypes online. You can publish design specs. These are all things that you can't do in the base version of Photoshop. So, and plus for me, I like looking at my designs being super crisp and clean. You know, in Photoshop, if you look at text, of course it's raster-based software, so or at least your text will be all pixelated and whereas look at this, it's lovely and clean. I mean, I know this is just FD, but whatever I do looks really super clean. So I just love looking at what I'm creating in that cleaner format as well. So it's a bit easier on the eyes, I think. But yeah, that's the main advantage, is the prototyping and sharing features and the responsiveness of the program. It is designed with this kind of wireframing and prototyping in mind. Mr. Andy says, I don't get why these are time-saving tips. I mean, some of these are very good at saving time, hopefully. rather than creating layout grids manually and going inside here and ungrouping and all that stuff and trying to create a shadow. You know, there's a few tips there on shadows. I think it's time saving in the sense of learning new stuff. So you're saving time by knowing stuff as well. Hopefully this is helpful anyway. Cool. Right, if you do have any more questions, we're going to do a little bit more Q&A at the end. And we're going to jump in and do the rest of the stuff in the stream. So, okay. Scaling content proportionally. So what's this? Number 10. So if you do have something in XD, like a circle, you can of course drag this around and it will skew it out of shape. You can hold Shift and it will scale it proportionally, or you can hold Alt as well as Shift and it scales up and down from the center. Now sometimes when you create shapes in XD, you will see the link option up here. And if this is checked, when you scale from the corner, regardless of whether you hold Shift or not, it will scale it proportionally. So if you do want to skew anything out of shape, you see this link, you just uncheck that link and it will unlock the aspect ratio between the width and the height. And it will allow you to adjust that. So similarly with squares or rectangles, if you get caught when you're just trying to kind of lengthen this and it won't do that, just make sure you've got that unchecked. Or conversely, if you want to make sure that it does always scale proportionally, you can just link that there and it will stay proportionally. There we go. That's probably the quickest one, but sometimes, at least when I first started using XD, you know, I had to kind of figure out why I was scaling it and it wasn't retaining its proportions, or I created a new shape and it was staying proportional and I wanted to distort it. So just that little link there is just one to be aware of if you're adjusting the size of shapes. Ooh, background blur. Okay, this one is a fun one. I love this. Love this. Right, let's pick. Oh, this will look nice. Okay, so we've got a really nice photo here. Again, super high res, so we'll scale that down. And this is the great thing about XD as well, is as I scale my image up or down, it retains those proportions because, you know, of course, why would you want to skew it out of shape? I mean, you may want to, but... So there we go. Anything that goes off of the artboard just isn't shown. So that's really cool. I can just adjust that. And you can, if you want to, go and add a rectangle that is the exact width and height of your artboard, and then just go and add that as a mask as well if you want to. So we're going to add a rectangle now. And we'll just give this... I'll leave this with a white fill, and we'll just stretch this out so it fills the entire width of the content. And bring this down a bit. Now, oftentimes when you might want to create a UI design, you may wish to have some text information. So if we just go and type lovely photo, and we'll type John Smith. I don't actually know the author of this name. I don't know the talented individual that took this photo. I don't know their name, so they're going to have to be John Smith, unfortunately. But it's a lovely photo. So we're going to add some text information here. And I think I will change the color of this as well. So this is going to be our UI design. And of course, sometimes that, at a very small size, is quite hard to read. So oftentimes when you've got text information, or if you've got paragraphs of text and you want it to stand out against an image, you may wish to add a background blur. So this blurs the area around the text and makes it more legible, but it still kind of is in keeping with the aesthetic of the image overall, because you're just blurring what's behind the box in this case. And you can do this with any shape. It doesn't have to be a box. So what we can do is we can just check the background blur option. Now XD always puts the brightness here at 15, so I like to just knock that back to normal. but you can adjust the brightness here as well if you want. And you've got the opacity here as well. So remember, this fill is black here, so as we increase this to 100%, it will bring back that fill. But if you just want to go with straight blur what's behind this shape, just keep these at 0 here and adjust the blur. And it adjusts in real time. Now in Photoshop you can do this, but you can do it with masks. And I find it's a little bit more fiddly, so we can adjust this here. And we could make this a subtle blur. I don't have to go crazy like this. But you can see, because we've got the colors from the image, the photo coming through, it all hangs together really nicely. And I could group this together, and as I move this around, it blurs what is behind it. So whereas when you mask something in Photoshop, you're masking a specific area. And you can move it around, but it's just a bit more fiddly. But this, I can just double click or hold Command or Control click to go in the group. And we could do something like this. So I could just have that as a tag in the corner. And wherever I position it, it's blurring what is behind it. So I absolutely love that. And when you're doing app design, that feature is amazing. It's probably one of my favorite things. That and layout grids, they're my favorite additions, I think. Okay, so now we're going to look at point versus container type. So when you type in XD, this is some text. Ha, there we go. Let's give it a color. This is some text. As always, incredibly creative. We'll just scale that down a bit. So I created this by just simply left clicking on the artboard. Now this is called point text, where you just click and you type your text. Container type or container text is where you left click and drag and you create a text box. Now the advantage of this is if you have lots of text and you need it to sit within a box, what it does is as you approach the edge, it will wrap onto the next line. So let's make this considerably smaller. And we'll then just copy and paste this. So pretend this is a lot of descriptive text. And as you're adjusting your design, it wraps. So incredibly useful for paragraph text or anything that you might need to wrap over multiple lines. But you can also switch these around. So you can switch this from container or area text here to point text in XD. And you can do the same here. So if you do decide that you created it one way and you think, oh, I need to be able to edit this and have it wrap on multiple lines, you can do. And if you get something like this, where you see this little circle within a circle at the top, it just means that your text is hidden. Just extend that area text or that container text box and it will become visible. So if you just make it a bit too small, of course your text will be hidden. So just make sure you drag it out if you are using area or container text. I'm not sure what this was I was trying to type there. Okay. So I can switch that back to point text because that is a title, and that one can be area text. And you can toggle between them both. Okay. Repeat grid tool. Now this is amazing. This is something that is unique to XD. I absolutely love this. So at the moment, this is 300 pixels wide by 300 pixels high. That's the artboard. So I'm going to create a grid of images. You can use this for a content feed. It's fantastic for a content creator like myself as well when I've got lots of stuff I want to lay out quickly. So let's just create a square. And we'll just give this any fill for now because we're going to cover it with images in a minute. So of course we have an artboard 300 wide, 300 high. So we're going to have 3 going across and 3 down. So let's do the math. 300 divided by 3 is 100. Now, whereas normally in other apps like Photoshop or Illustrator or anything, you'd have to go and manually create all of these and then mask them and all that stuff. No, 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 no. In XD, we simply create one piece of content. It could be a piece of content on a content feed. We select repeat grid and we drag out. Now by default it will add a 20 pixel gutter or a bit of spacing between these, both horizontally and vertically, but we just drag that down to 0 by clicking in that space and then just snap these here. So all of this you can see as I'm mousing over, these are our images, and what we can do is we can grab these 9 images, drag them on, and it will populate all of these different things. So if you have a content feed, the content feed UI is going to have one style, but you want to simulate lots of content, you just design one, repeat grid it, and then just chuck in the content. So we could double click to go inside our repeat grid group now. We can type some text. We position it here. So let's go photo title. And you can see as I start changing the actual text content, it's specific to each image. Misty mountains. But if I move it around, it's consistent. So any pieces of content, the actual image, the text content, the words that are being written, those are unique to each image, but the styling, so if we go and change the color now, the styling is consistent. So when you have an entire content feed and you want to make little changes and things like that, it makes it incredibly easy to do so. So fantastic tool. And of course, if you create your content and you think, I need to do something that isn't repeat grid tool friendly, just go to ungroup grid and it will leave all your content there, but it's just normal shapes and text now. And a few bits may be grouped together, so you just need to ungroup them. Rightio, publish design specs. Now this is something else that's a new addition or a very recent addition to XD. Incredibly useful for that process from handing off from a designer to a developer. So when you hand over a project from designer to developer, obviously there's so many details that you've got to try and communicate to them, the spacing, the colors, this, that, and the other. And a lot of that can get lost in translation between the designer and the developer. Not anymore. So let's just say we've done a really, really lovely app here. I'll show you a much better example in a moment. You've finished your app, all your artboards are fantastic. You go up to the share icon in the top right corner and go publish design specs. And this is in beta at the moment. And you just give this a name. The units, well, they're based on custom units because we created our own artboards. And you can click new link and it will generate a link. I believe this is going to generate one from all of the artboards that we've been working on. And it'll just take a moment to do that. And there we go. So we can then open that and it will open it in our default browser, or we can just click copy link and it copies that to the clipboard. And if you make any changes, just jump back up here and then go update link and it will update it. So here's an app that I believe was from another stream. So this was a 2-screen app that I designed. I uploaded it and we can click in here. And we can see that if I start clicking around, so I'm now a developer, I'm looking at this and I can see here, if I click on the menu icon, I've got the dimensions. Ooh, we've got some half pixels there, naughty. I can see the dimensions. I can click on the text. I get all this font information, the width, the height, the X and the Y position, the alignment, the size, the weight, the color. I get everything. Everything. And any content there. And I can just click in that space and it will copy any content here to the clipboard. Click in here. It colors that. It copies that color reference, so hashtag FFF, which of course represents white. So it makes it incredibly easy for a developer to just hover over content, see what's what the width of things are, click on certain elements, and they just get more information here as well. And you can adjust the zoom up here, or you can hold down space on the keyboard and you get that little hand, and you can scroll up and down the design, and you can navigate from screen to screen at the bottom as well. So you can even see here I've got a gradient over a blurred background here, and it has all of the different colors that make up the gradient, the opacity, the angle. It's just brilliant. It just gives developers so much more information than they would have been able to previously have. And what this means is that the more information that you're able to give as a designer to a developer, the less of that information is going to get lost in that process. So the better process, it means a better output. It's just going to be a much, much better product, and everyone's going to be happier. Designers get to see their product built with all the detail that it was designed with, and developers get the information they need to be able to build it. So it's just a win-win, really. But anyway, let's calm down and jump back into XD. Now this is the last one. Downloading UI kits. Now I don't know if you know this or not, but you can go to File, Open, Get UI Kits, and you get the Apple iOS, Google Material, Microsoft Windows UI kits that you can open up in XD, or you get wireframes as well. So I've actually loaded these up in a browser. So this is the Apple one. So if you're designing an iOS app, you can get all of these different bits of UI. It's a huge kit, and you get everything in there that you can use to build your app or mock it up, or if you want to mock it up in like a certain way or within the iOS framework, then you have it here. In fact, you can download it for other programs as well, but you've got the XD one right here, and just open it up in XD, and voila, you've got the UI kit for iOS, Google Material, and Windows. Now that's pretty cool. In my opinion, this is even cooler. So these lovely folks here, they've pulled together these wireframe kits. And you can get this for Adobe XD. And, well, let's have a look. 170 mobile templates, 90 web templates, 240 components, and 178 customizable icons. Now, if that's not cool, well, I don't know what is. That is a huge, huge head start. So if you're thinking of wireframing a project, or you're even thinking, I mean, these wireframes look good. Like, look at them. They look really, really, they're pretty high fidelity wireframes. They're very smart. But this is a completely free wireframe kit that you can download. So, I mean, apologies if I'm getting excited. This is really cool in my opinion. So fair play to these guys for doing this. But that's super cool. That is super cool. So there we go. You've got the UI kits, and we've got some wireframe kits. So if you're interested in getting started with XD, or you're even starting a new project and you'd love a really, really nice high fidelity wireframe kit to use for your project, then there we go. You know, there are some things to get you started. Cool. Right, we're going to do a few more questions. Can you elaborate a bit on exporting so you always get crisp exports? Cheers on the great tutorials. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Dimitar Petrov. Hope I pronounced your name right. So when it comes down to exporting, let's go and just create some buttons. So I'll do this really quickly. And you can see how snappy and responsive XD is, especially if you start learning all of these different shortcut keys here. When you use it regularly, you just become super familiar with everything. And because it's so responsive, you really can just whiz around the UI and bring whatever ideas are in your head to life so quickly. I really do love it. So there we go. We've got a lovely, lovely button. Now, if I want to export this as one button, I would need to group these together. So I can group them together. And from the layers panel, I can give this a name. So this is the name that it's going to export as. And I can go to File, Export. And I can export what I've got selected, or I could just export all artboards. So I can export this as button.png. Now, of course, that is a raster format, so it's not going to be vector, but of course you may need that. So you just have to choose whether you're exporting just the PNG or whether you're going to be exporting it for the web. So we've got standard definition or high definition displays, or iOS as well. Same again, different definitions depending on whether it's just you know, 1x, 2x, or 3x. And Android is similar but slightly different. So you have these different HD, DPIs, medium DPI, low DPI, medium DPI, high DPI, extra high, all this kind of stuff. So it depends what device you're actually exporting it for. Or you can just export the design as a PNG or as a vector graphic that you can use online as an SVG. So we can go and export that to the desktop. And if we have a look, we've then got our PNG button there. And of course, you know, it is that size, so you can see it's a little bit pixelated. Or we can export it as an SVG or a completely different format. And we've then got it as a vector graphic. So it stays nice and crisp. But if you are going to export SVG, as we touched on earlier, just, you know, just double check your X and your Y position here, your width and your height, just to make sure everything is rounded up to the nearest pixel, because when you export as a PNG, it just gives you the best chance at getting a really nice, clean graphic, or as clean as you can get with something like a PNG. Adash asks, how can I change text lowercase to uppercase? At the moment, I think you have to do it manually. So hopefully this is something that they will add to XD in future. So there isn't any toggle button. There is an underline button, so you can instantly underline text. And what I love about this one is, I need a descender, underline G. It actually includes the space for the descenders on your letters, which is something that I haven't actually ever seen before. And I love this because there is nothing worse than having a G or a J and your underline just goes straight through it. It's the worst. It looks horrible. So this is really cool. But so I'm sorry, we don't, there's no feature to, or at least currently, to instantly turn everything caps or lowercase. Hopefully this is added in future. I'd love to see a little button there that does that. But on the bright side, you can underline stuff and it accounts for descenders on letters. So so that's pretty cool. Dimitar says, what are your thoughts on the new plugin integrations Adobe XD introduced to XD, and which are your favorites? I mean, I think Zeppelin is very interesting. Zeppelin's pretty cool. If you've never used it before, it's a similar thing to published design specs, but I think it's been around a little bit longer and it's been kind of a bit more developed as a standalone program. So you can open up your whole XD project in Zeppelin and then you can share it with developers or clients and they can see all that kind of information. But it also generates, if it's similar to how I've used it before, it generates CSS code as well for your designs. So I've not actually used Zeppelin yet with XD specifically, but that is something that it can do, is generate some CSS code, which makes developers' lives even easier. But it's pretty cool. Something else that I really like is something called Protopie. And I'm going to try and explore this a little bit more in future as well. Essentially, Protopie enables you to design your concept, your prototype in XD, but then you can go and add things like micro interactions, and you can actually start to bring it to life and just take it that little extra step and make it a little bit more believable. So that's something that I've seen pop up fairly recently, and I'm really excited to experiment with that and try that out a bit more, because I think from what I've seen so far, it's got some real potential to just take design from XD that extra step forward and start adding those nice little subtle micro interactions that are really going to improve the user experience. And really just kind of, you know, the idea with prototyping is to fake it till you make it. You want to make it as convincing as possible to the user tester, the client, the stakeholder, that what they're viewing and what they're testing is a real working product. So getting micro interactions in there as well with something like Protopie is just going to help, you know, help someone feel like they're actually using a real product when they're not. That is ultimately the goal of prototyping, I think. But yes, on that note, if there are no more questions, I think we're going to wrap up the stream there. So thank you to everyone for joining. I hope you enjoyed this. A nice bit of variety in XD. There's a few time-saving tips there and some things like background blurring that's just really cool. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much to the moderators within the chat and for everyone joining. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here as always. My name is Daniel White, aka Dansky. Thank you very much. Have a fantastic morning, noon, or night, depending on where you are in the world. Take care, and I'll see you soon.